Welcome to the Aaron Harber Show. My guest today is the author of White American Youth and a former white nationalist, Christian Picciolini. Christian, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Aaron. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great having you on the show. I'm fascinated by your story. I want to hear more about it, but I want you to first talk about how, especially young men, end up entering the white supremacist movement.
You know, I've worked with, several hundred people to help them disengage and to provide support. And I can tell you from my own experience and from their experience, the number one factor for people gravitating to these movements is there's always some underlying trauma and they're looking for acceptance. It's this process of, this foundational search for identity, community, and purpose that we all have. But if you hit enough potholes in the road on your life's journey, sometimes you get detoured down a pretty dark alley. And unfortunately, there are people waiting in the wings for you to kind of come along.
Right. In fact, in your story, it sounds like, when you were 14,
right.
And as related in your book, which, by the way, and I want to just talk about the concept of the book and how powerful it is. In the sense you just said, I've worked with a couple hundred young people who want to get out of these movements and organizations. By publishing that book, you're going to be able to reach 100 times more people.
Yeah, I recognized a long time ago that I could only do so much one-on-one, and it is a very one-on-one process. And I needed to scale somewhat. So part of that strategy was to publish my memoir. And not at the time, not really understanding or knowing the impact that it would have on some people, but I get emails and phone calls from people who've read it, who say, I did the same thing 20 years ago and I've never been able to speak about it. In fact, my wife doesn't know, my friends don't know, and I've been holding in this trauma of me traumatizing other people that I'm so glad that there's somebody else. I thought I was the only one in the world. And what I've done for those folks is create an online private support group where they help each other, because there's so many people with similar stories that have never been able to discuss it openly for fear. That they're still dealing with that pain, and they help each other. We help each other kind of get whole again.
That's great. And back to your story, 14 years old, and you have the story about you were smoking a joint in an alley, and you were approached. I guess a car came up, and you thought it was a friend of yours, right?
Yeah, I didn't really know who it was. I was standing at 14 years old. I was standing in that alley, completely angry and feeling marginalized and lonely and acting out. And
you had a friend with you, though. But
yeah.
he ditched you real quickly.
He didn't last very long. As soon as this car started roaring down the alley, he had recognized who it was. And when the guy skidded to a halt right in front of me and got out of the car, he walked over to me and he pulled a joint out of my mouth and smacked me in the head. But then he looked me in the eyes and he said, "That's what the communists and the Jews want you to do. They keep you docile." I didn't know what the heck a communist, a Jew, or even what the word docile meant at 14. I wasn't raised as a racist. It wasn't part of my DNA. And I look around and the kid that I was with is gone because I was terrified. Here was this 27-year-old man with a shaved head and boots. And nobody knew what a skinhead was in 1987. But then, this kind of aggressive...
And this is in Chicago.
This is in the southwest side of Chicago, where the neo-Nazi skinhead movement was born in the mid-1980s. Most people don't know that. But after he kind of made that aggressive move towards me, he kind of consoled me by putting his hand on my shoulder and drawing me in by telling me that I should be proud of my Italian heritage, that my ancestors were great warriors. He was trying to build me up and draw me in. And I bit, because that was the first lifeline that I felt I ever got to some sense of identity, community, or purpose.
Well, in regard to that, I think it's really interesting when you think of, all of us want family. All of us want to be part of a tribe, part of a group. We all want to belong. But especially young men, when you think of somebody who's, 13, 14, 15, 16, so many, I think, young men at that age are terribly vulnerable because they're trying to figure out life, they're trying to figure out themselves, they're going through changes. Very, very vulnerable time.
That's the magic age, really. If you compare any type of extremist group, whether we're talking about ISIS or neo-Nazis or, what they're calling themselves white nationalists in the alt-right, to even cults and gangs and even sometimes religious groups and faith groups, people are drawn to them because it gives them a sense of structure. maybe in an uncertain world. It gives them a sense of who they are, where they belong, and who their family is, and it fills them with a greater purpose, something that's bigger than themselves. And for somebody who's never had any of those things before, they're very appealing because they do provide some of that. They do provide a brotherhood and camaraderie. They do provide you with the sense of power and identity. I went from this powerless 14-year-old kid who had been bullied and picked on and marginalized and was lonely, and suddenly I shaved my head and I wore boots and I surrounded myself with these other tough-looking people. And when I would walk down the street, now the bullies would cross over instead of attacking me. And that filled me with this sense of, I'm doing what's right, I'm getting the respect I deserve. And that was all a perceived, power. It wasn't real, it was fear. But for me, I didn't see it that way. I saw for the first time I had control of my life.
In the process, what happened, talk about what happened after that first encounter, because I'm particularly interested in the sequence of your involvement, because you got hooked pretty quickly.
I did, yeah, I did. I was always looking for something and I was never able to find it. It starts out very benign with this very soft kind of pitch or message. Nowadays they're using this hashtag, it's okay to be white. Because a lot of people would agree, myself included, of course it's okay to be white. It's okay to be everything. Whatever you are, it's okay to be. But then they follow it up with this narrative that is based in fear rhetoric that white males are having things taken away from them, that they are under attack. In fact, they'll go so far and claim that white males are the most persecuted people on earth right now, which I think if we look around and if we're part of this real world, we can see that that's false. White males are the power brokers of the world. They own the largest corporations in the world. They've held the power structure and maintained it and developed it in this country for 250 years. And I think what's happening is when people are afraid that they're losing something, they want to fight back. So they instill this fear in them through rhetoric that makes them feel that something's taken away. But it's not really being taken away. What's happening is they've enjoyed this level of power. Things are just finally starting to equalize for the groups that haven't enjoyed that power. Now, they're not quite there yet, but they're getting there. And that, sometimes having something taken away that you've enjoyed for a while feels like oppression.
Well, certainly, if you look at the world as a zero-sum game, that if you gain, I lose, or
Right.
if I gain, you lose, that's going to happen, as opposed to looking at, well, if we expand that pie, if
Right.
we expand and everybody, what we're doing is bigger and better, and we're growing,
Absolutely.
then everybody can come out ahead.
Well, think of all the solutions that would materialize if we actually brought opportunity to certain cities and neighborhoods that don't have it now, like the inner cities of Chicago, which are still very segregated. There are areas in the town that I live in that don't have public transportation. There are no functioning stores. There's no economic growth. There's no schools there because they're closing down, and schools are being built in more well-off neighborhoods. And the lack of opportunity is racism in itself, because white structure is taking that and keeping them from it, and also gentrifying the areas and making theirs smaller, causing them to be kind of like prisons without walls. And it's a very sad thing, because you're right, if more people had opportunity, if more people had jobs and skills and had an education and access to it, the economy would grow because more people would be making money. We would have skills that were marketable, and that would actually benefit everybody.
All right, well, we're going to work on that. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with Christian in just a moment.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. You can follow the show on Twitter for instant notification of new episodes, live event invitations, outtakes, and behind-the-scene photos. And tweet us your topic and guest suggestions today. I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. I very much would like to hear from you about the program, so please send me an email with your thoughts. You can suggest what topics I should cover, what guests I should invite to be on the show, or even what specific questions you would like me to ask. This is your program, so send your suggestions to aaron@harbertv.com. I promise to personally read every one, so email me today. And most of all, thanks for watching.
Join me and watch The Aaron Harber Show.
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 I'm Reverend Jesse Jackson. Watch The Aaron Harber Show and keep hope alive.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. Find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scene photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at harbortv.com.
Welcome back to the show. We are with former white nationalist Christian Picciolini. Christian, I'd be interested in the process, if you could break it down. So you were recruited. In the early days of your recruitment, were you being given the kind of lines you were talking about or propaganda, or was more about just meeting other people in the group and becoming more part of the tribe, as it were?
It was kind of a slow progression. At first, it was the pull of just acceptance and having other people that, you know, seem to respect you and love you, when I didn't feel like I had that anywhere else. And then once, you know, that gateway drug kind of pulls you in and you start to enjoy it, it ramps up a little bit. You know, then they start taking that very benign rhetoric and, you know, the it's okay to be white. And then they start saying that people want to take that away from you. And then it progresses slowly into, oh, and by the way, it's this group and this group and this group, and essentially anybody that wasn't us, because we could never self-reflect and blame ourselves. It was always the other's fault. And then by that time, once you are committing acts of violence, once you're learning how to recruit people, once you've detached yourself from everything else in your life that's important, like your family, your friends, your hobbies, then there's nothing to go back to. And abandoning sometimes the only identity, community, and purpose you've ever had is a really daunting thing to face, which is why a lot of people, without a mechanism to help them disengage and replace that identity, community, and purpose with something more positive, will just stay. And they'll bite their tongue and they'll commit, you know, violent acts, and it just becomes a social club for them, but they're still committing these hateful acts, and they don't ever find a way to get out until they go to prison or end up dead, and I've seen that happen many, many times.
What, in terms of your parents, what happened to that relationship?
Well, I'm happy to say my parents never gave up on me. I think at first when I was involved, I did a good job of hiding it as a young kid. But by the time I was 16, I was not interested in hiding it. Then I used it to punish them because I was still angry at them. And in fact, my parents are Italian immigrants, and I became very anti-immigrant. It was almost as if I was projecting my own self-hatred and loathing and insecurities onto everybody else, just so that I didn't have to feel that pain. You know, sometimes when I hurt people or when I made them feel worse than me, that was one of the only occasions that I actually felt that I could feel good about myself or that I was better than them.
Did, you know, when it came to engaging in violence, what was the time frame between when you were first recruited and when you actually started engaging in violent acts? And what kind of acts were those?
You know, the majority of them were street fights. You know, just like today there's opposition for the Nazis that march. We also had our fair share of opposition. It's much more intense today than it was during my day.
Well, you were part of the beginning of that whole movement, really.
We were also much scarier looking. Our packaging was different, and that was intentional to provoke people and to scare people. Nowadays, when the look has become very normalized, where it's, you know, about wearing a polo and khakis and not getting tattoos that are swastikas, and taking even the message and making it a little bit more palatable and using words like the elite globalists instead of the Jewish conspiracy, or the liberal media instead of the Jewish controlled media. I mean, they've even gotten marketing savvy and started polishing their messages so they're just a little bit more palatable for the average American white racist. You know, after that, it really progressed into a position of a local leader. Then I became a regional leader. Then I became a national leader. And then when I started a band in 1990, we were the first band to ever, within that genre, to ever leave the United States and play in Germany. We played in front of 4,000 people there, and I was only 17. And that filled me with even a more intense feeling of this perception of power. So I was very intoxicated by it, having never really experienced it before. But at that time, I also started my crash. That's when I started to, at 19 years old, I got married and we had our first child, and at 21, we had our second son.
And how did you meet your wife?
You know, it's funny because she was not a part of the movement that I was a part of. She was, you know, kind of on the periphery. She knew people but she wasn't political. And in fact, she didn't want anything to do with me when I first started to court her. And I had to try for a long time to do that. And we fell in love eventually. And because I wouldn't leave the movement quickly enough, my wife and my children left me. And that was really the start of kind of this downhill period. I also owned a record store at the time to sell racist music. And I began to meet people there that were people I thought I hated, African Americans and Jewish people and gay people.
But that was because, reading your book, you weren't just selling racist music. They weren't the Jews and African Americans were not coming to buy the racist music.
No, the town that I was in kind of caught wind that I was selling racist music, and they made sure that I would serve the whole community. So they forced me to sell other music like hip hop and punk rock and heavy metal. And I never thought I was going to sell any of that because everybody knew who I was, and 75% of my revenue was, you know, hate music. But folks came in despite knowing who I was, and they didn't attack me. They weren't aggressive with me. They didn't debate me. In fact, they were very compassionate. And they didn't need to be. It wasn't their responsibility. In fact, they put themselves in danger by doing that. But just over time, it was little conversations that would eventually lead to very personal conversations. And receiving the compassion from the people I least deserved it from, when I least deserved it, was probably the most powerful, transformative moment for me.
So at what point did you realize it's time to really make a big change?
Well, I had questions every day of those 8 years, but I think once my wife and my children left, once I decided to pull the racist music from the store because I was so embarrassed to sell it in front of these new friends, and the store collapsed, that was my bottom. You know, I'd lost everything that was important to me, and I used that opportunity to walk away from the movement, to kind of just fade away because I wasn't brave enough to denounce it at that time. I wanted to kind of just ignore it and outrun it until I couldn't do that anymore. It was almost literally killing me to do that. I was treating other people with respect, but I wasn't treating myself very well.
So you literally hit rock bottom.
I did.
What was your next step? And how did you take it?
Well, the next step was 5 years of depression, very deep and dark depression where I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't know where I belonged or even what I was supposed to do. And so I was trying to outrun this, but I think because I had kept it inside, I was really damaging myself. And then one day, a friend, one of the few friends that I had, suggested that I go apply for a job where she had just started working. Small company, you've probably never heard of it, called IBM. Right. You know, this very bizarre request of me to go interview there, and I thought she was crazy.
Where were you living at the time?
I was living in my parents' basement, I believe, at the time. I had moved back. You know, my wife and she got the house, and I ended up moving, into this miserable, dark basement apartment, and I just felt like such a failure and worthless at that time. But I ended up getting the job with IBM, and I was so excited.
How did you get that job?
My friend encouraged me. She said, just go tell them that you're nice with people, that you're good with people. And I said, okay. I did know how to manage people. I did have some transferable skills, but I didn't quite know how to be empathetic just fully yet, because I still had this cancer inside of me that, I didn't fully extinguish. It wasn't driving me anymore, but it still was kind of rotting me from the inside. And I was excited because I finally was going to have hope. There was something, until they told me where I'd be going to work on that first day. And then they told me I'd be going to install the network and computers at my old high school, the same one I'd gotten kicked out of twice and let out in handcuffs, 8 years prior to that. And I was terrified.
All right, we'll talk about that when you come back. We're going to take our last break with Christian. We'll be back in a moment.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. You can follow the show on Twitter for instant notification of new episodes, live event invitations, outtakes, and behind-the-scene photos. And tweet us your topic and guest suggestions today.
The Rex Howell Broadcaster of the Year Award recognizes an individual who, through leadership, skill, and dedication, is advancing the broadcast industry in our state and our nation. Tonight, we honor Aaron Harber. Aaron has worked extensively in the media as a host, producer, political and economic commentator, and columnist. Today, the Aaron Harber Show is the focus of his media involvement. Aaron, it is a privilege to present you with the Rex Howell Broadcaster of the Year Award. Congratulations.
Just make journalism great again. I'm Aaron Harber, host of the Aaron Harber Show. I very much would like to hear from you about the program, so please send me an email with your thoughts. You can suggest what topics I should cover, what guests I should invite to be on the show, or even what specific questions you would like me to ask. This is your program, so send your suggestions to aaron@harbortv.com. I promise to personally read every one, so email me today. And most of all, thanks for watching.
Join me and watch the Aaron Harber Show.
Watch the Aaron Harber Show.
Watch the Aaron Harber Show.
Watch the Aaron Harper Show.
Watch the Aaron Harber Show.
I'm Reverend Jesse Jackson. Watch the Aaron Harber Show and keep hope alive.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of the Aaron Harber Show. Find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scene photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at harbortv.com.
Welcome back to the show. This is our final segment with Christian Picciolini. So, Christian, what happened? You got the job at IBM and you're sent back to your old school. What happened?
You know, I was terrified. I was like a nervous schoolboy, but I went. And I thought I would just kind of creep around the dark hallways and avoid people for however long it took. And of course, that didn't happen. Within the first hour, the man who I had gotten in a fist fight with, Mr. Holmes, the old black security guard, which got me let out in handcuffs, walks right by me.
He's still working there?
Still working there. Still to this day working there.
Wow.
And, you know, I didn't know what to do. I was terrified. I was frozen. I didn't know what to say. But somehow my feet started moving. They knew I needed to do something, so I started to follow him out to the parking lot. And when I saw him getting into his car, I tapped him on the shoulder. And when he turned around, he jumped back because he was afraid.
He recognized you.
Yeah, he recognized me in that moment. And all I could think to say to him was, I'm sorry. And eventually I found more words, and we talked, and I explained to him what, you know, life had been like after I'd left. And he made me make a promise, and that was to tell my story, because I think he recognized this wasn't the story of, you know, your typical broken home kid who was destined to be in a gang. This was really the story of every kind of normal kid who could so easily be brought down the path of something negative, like extremism. And I've been telling my story for 20 years now.
Amazing. What about now that we have the advent since then of social media for white supremacist movements? What's the impact?
Well, the impact is massive. I've seen, you know, what was essentially a fringe group before the election of 2016, then appear like a bucket of gasoline was kicked over and ignited all these small fires that existed into a forest fire. It's become a very powerful and growing social movement for young white people who feel marginalized. And the internet has really facilitated that, partly because you can be whoever you want on the internet without much repercussion. And most of the folks who are going to these movements are, in real life, marginalized, traumatized people. So they don't have very many connections in the real world, and they live online where propaganda is flourishing, where it's very difficult to not step in it. And once you do, the algorithms that love to curate everything for us on the internet continually feed us down into this rabbit hole where it's, you know, once you're in, that's your reality. And anything anybody else says is completely wrong. unfortunately, that's happening, I think, on both sides. I mean, this isn't just exclusive to the far right. I think, we are so divided now that the extreme voices, even though they're fewer, are louder. And we're all feeling like we need to choose a side, when in reality, we all kind of live in the middle. So yeah, I mean, it's become something where, some of the most disturbing trends that I'm seeing because of the internet are the ways that they're recruiting people and where they're recruiting people. They're intentionally looking for our most vulnerable. They're going to depression forums to try and recruit people, autism forums, gaming forums. They're talking to our children over their headsets when they're playing multiplayer games. And that to me is something that I didn't even see 30 years ago. We looked for vulnerable people, but it was, the kids that looked dirty at the skate park, or, were already smoking pot in the alley and things like that. But it seems to me that they are absolutely trying to target people that they think that they can easily manipulate, and they've been successful.
What's the impact of the Trump administration on all this?
Well, certainly the rhetoric that's coming out is very similar to what we used to say 30 years ago. It's slightly polished, maybe, but the theme is the same. We were anti-immigrant. We wanted to build a wall. We were happy with tearing families, away from each other. We would have been ecstatic with a ban against Jews and Muslims. And frankly speaking, while I have hope, I have tremendous hope, because I've been all over the world and I've seen the hearts of people and the impact that this is having. I'm also terrified, because this has gone from a fringe group now to one that has extreme power, and not only in our country, but it's starting to grow in places like Europe as well. And that trend is one that's based in uncertainty. We're living in uncertain times, and when we live in uncertainty, extremist voices tend to kind of come to the top.
So looking ahead, what do you want to do? What do you hope to accomplish in terms of bringing young men,
and women,
and women, out of these movements, and also finding ways to help them so they don't go into these movements in the first place? That's
a really great question. So when I work with people to help them disengage from any type of extremist movement, I've worked with former ISIS members in Europe and certainly neo-Nazis in America. I don't argue with them. I don't debate them. I don't tell them that they're wrong. I want to, but I don't. Because I know from experience, had that happened to me, it would have pushed me further away. It would have made me angrier. Instead, I listen, and I listen for those potholes that they've encountered on their journey, and I pay attention. I can filter out all the noise and listen to the important parts, and part of that is because I used to say it, and I now can identify and read between the lines. And what I do is I empower people. I make them more resilient. I'll find them a job trainer or a life coach or a mental health therapist or tattoo removal, or sometimes all of them. And when I make somebody more resilient, when I empower them and make them more confident in themselves, there's really no reason to blame the other for something you feel is being taken away. But I don't stop there, because I do have to challenge the ideology, but I do it in a compassionate way, let's say. I'll introduce them to the people they think they hate, which is the same thing that happened to me. And I can tell you that it's very effective. Every time I've brought somebody in with this demonization in their head of the other, which they've never met, of course, it gets replaced with humanization. It's very hard to not understand and feel when you're in the company of one person who's being kind to you.
Are you optimistic about the future?
I'm very optimistic about the future. I know there are a lot of good people, and I know that, in our history we've gone through this roller coaster, and maybe we haven't lived up to these great American ideals yet, but we're on our way there, and I feel that this is a major turning point. Recently, I've had some of the major leaders from the alt-right movement reach out to me to defect, and I think that that's a positive indication of the work that I've been doing and people like me have been doing, so I think we need to keep up the pressure.
All right. Well, keep up the good work. Christian, thanks so much.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
That was Christian Picciolini. I'm Aaron Harber. Thanks for watching.
Please contact us. We want to hear from you. And thanks for watching.